Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. We're diving into a really chilling chapter today.
Oh, yeah.
It happened in Wichita, Kansas,
Hmm.
back in December of 2000.
Wow.
And, this is a story that really forces us to confront the darkness that can lurk in the shadows, but it also shows just how resilient the human spirit can be.
You got that right.
When I first heard about this case,
Yeah.
the thing that really struck me was the brutality of the crimes, but also just how random it all seemed.
Right.
A chilling thought.
It is.
To think that anyone anywhere could be a target of such violence just out of the blue.
Anyone.
To help us understand this case better,
Yeah.
we have our expert here today.
I'm happy to be here.
So the Wichita Massacre.
Right.
That's what we're talking about, and the randomness of it is one of the most disturbing aspects.
Absolutely.
The fact that the victims were seemingly chosen at random adds a layer of terror that goes beyond even the horrific nature of the crimes themselves.
You're absolutely right.
Let's rewind back to December 2000.
Okay.
Can you set the scene for us?
Sure.
Who were these perpetrators and what exactly happened in Wichita during that week?
At the heart of this story are two brothers, Reginald and Jonathan Carr.
Okay.
Over a 7-day period,
7 days.
they unleashed a wave of violence across Wichita.
Wow.
And it culminated in this horrific home invasion
Okay.
that left 5 people dead and 1 critically injured.
5 people dead.
Their crimes included robbery, rape, carjacking, and ultimately murder.
That's a lot.
It is.
And what's really unsettling is that their final act of violence,
Yeah.
the one that really gripped the nation, targeted a group of young people who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That's right.
It's just bad luck.
It is.
On December 14th, the Carr brothers broke into a home on East Birchwood Drive. That was a seemingly random choice.
It was.
And it really underscored the sense of vulnerability that permeated the community in the aftermath of these crimes.
Absolutely a community on edge.
I remember reading about this, and it's just chilling to think about.
It is.
Inside that house were 5 young adults: Brad Haka, Heather Muller, Aaron Sander, Jason Befford,
Okay.
and his girlfriend, known publicly only as Holly G.
I see.
Can you walk us through what happened that night?
Sure.
While being mindful of the sensitive nature of these events?
Of course.
I know it can be hard to talk about.
It can.
What unfolded that night was a scene of unimaginable terror.
Yes.
The Carr brothers held these 5 individuals captive for hours.
Hours upon hours.
Subjecting them to unimaginable cruelty.
Absolutely.
They were robbed, sexually assaulted, and forced to withdraw money from ATMs.
It's hard to even imagine.
And then, in a chilling turn of events, the Carr brothers drove their victims to a soccer complex.
Oh, wow.
On the outskirts of Wichita. They were forced to kneel and shot execution style.
In the back of the head.
It's difficult to even fathom the horror those young people must have experienced.
I can't imagine.
But amidst this absolute nightmare, there's a glimmer of hope. A story of survival against all odds.
There is.
You talk about Holly G., the sole survivor of that horrific night.
Exactly.
Her story is just incredible, a testament to the strength of the human spirit.
It is.
To think that she endured all of that and still managed to escape, it's remarkable.
Truly is.
It truly is.
Incredibly, the bullet that was meant to end her life was deflected by a plastic hair barrette she was wearing.
Or a hair barrette?
Imagine that, a simple hair accessory becoming the difference between life and death.
It's almost unbelievable.
I know it.
A twist of fate that defies logic.
It does.
She then managed to walk naked for over a mile.
Wow.
And freezing December temperatures to find help.
That's incredible.
I can't even imagine the sheer willpower and determination that must have taken.
And before she even received medical attention,
Really?
She gave a detailed account of the ordeal and descriptions of her attackers to the couple who took her in.
Wow, that's amazing.
This was absolutely crucial to the investigation.
So Holly's story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find a way to persevere.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder that hope can exist even in the face of unimaginable horror.
It can.
But sadly, the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
There's another chilling detail that speaks to the depths of the Carr brothers' depravity.
Yes, you're referring to what happened after the killings.
I am.
The Carr brothers returned to the house on East Birchwood Drive.
Oh, no.
Not just to ransack it further for valuables, but to commit another senseless act of violence.
This is terrible.
They used a golf club to beat Holly G's pet dog to death.
That's just awful.
It's a chilling detail that speaks to the utter depravity of their actions.
It does.
Just unimaginable cruelty.
Before we go any further, I want to encourage everyone listening to hit that subscribe button.
Please do.
You won't want to miss the rest of this deep dive.
It's going to be good.
We're going to explore the capture, the trial, and the complex legal battles that followed. Trust me, it's a story that will stay with you long after you finish listening.
Absolutely.
Now, Holly G's survival was obviously a pivotal moment in this case.
It was.
Her eyewitness testimony proved to be crucial in bringing the Carr brothers to justice.
It did.
Can you walk us through their capture, conviction, and the legal complexities that ensued?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thanks to Holly's detailed account and descriptions, the police were able to apprehend the Carr brothers.
Really?
Within 24 hours of the home invasion.
That's remarkable.
It is.
To think that they were apprehended so quickly after such a complex and brutal crime spree.
I know, it's impressive.
It's a testament to the power of eyewitness testimony and the dedication of the law enforcement officers involved in the case.
Absolutely.
The brothers were subsequently convicted on a staggering number of charges, nearly 113 in total.
Wow.
Including multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, robbery, and rape.
That's a lot of charges.
It is.
Both Reginald and Jonathan Carr were ultimately sentenced to death.
So that seems pretty straightforward.
It does.
But were there any legal complexities or challenges that arose during the trials?
There were.
Okay, like what?
While their guilt was never in question,
Right.
the Carr brothers' case became entangled in a broader debate about the death penalty in Kansas. In fact, the Kansas Supreme Court overturned their death sentences not once, but twice.
Wait, twice?
Twice.
That's unusual.
It is unusual.
What were the grounds for overturning the sentences?
The first time was in 2004 when the Kansas Supreme Court struck down the state's death penalty law altogether.
They struck down the entire law.
They did. However, the Kansas Attorney General appealed that decision.
Okay.
And in 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the death penalty.
Wow.
Not just in Kansas, but nationwide.
So they were back on death row at least for a while, but you said the Kansas Supreme Court overturned their sentences again?
I did.
I'm curious why.
Yes, in 2014, the Kansas Supreme Court once again overturned the Carr's death sentences, this time due to a technicality.
Oh, a technicality.
They argued that the original trial judge erred by not granting each brother a separate penalty proceeding. They felt that this violated the brothers' Eighth Amendment rights.
I see. Wow, that's a pretty significant legal twist.
It is.
So what happened next?
So,
did the case go back to trial?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The state's attorney general once again appealed the decision.
This is getting complicated.
This time to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay.
And in a landmark ruling in 2016, the court sided with the state and reinstated the death sentences for both Reginald and Jonathan Carr.
So after years of legal back and forth, the Carr brothers remain on death row to this day.
They do.
It's amazing how this case became such a focal point in the national debate over capital punishment.
It really does highlight the complexities and nuances of the legal system.
It does.
Especially when dealing with cases that involve the death penalty.
Absolutely. And it certainly underscores the long-lasting impact of this case.
Right.
Not just on the victims and their family.
Of course.
But on the legal landscape as well.
Absolutely.
But there's another layer to this story that I think is important to explore.
All right.
It raises some uncomfortable but essential questions about how we as a society perceive and process crime.
Right.
Particularly when it involves issues of race.
It's a tough one.
We'll dive into that aspect of the Wichita Massacre right after this short break.
Sounds good.
Don't go anywhere.
We'll be right back. The Wichita Massacre, like a lot of high-profile crimes, got a ton of media attention.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how all these different narratives came up, especially when you think about the racial dynamics of the case.
You're right. The victims were white.
Right.
And the perpetrators, Reginald and Jonathan Carr, were black.
Yes.
And there are a lot of talk at the time.
There was.
And even still today about whether this affected how the media covered it and how the public saw the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The case really became a flashpoint in the debate over racial bias in the media.
I could see that.
Some commentators, particularly those leaning conservative, argued that the case didn't get as much national attention as it should have. And they pointed to the racial dynamics as the reason.
Wow, they thought it would have been a much bigger story if the races were reversed.
That's what they suggested.
That's a serious accusation.
It is.
Is there any evidence to back that up?
It's tough to say for sure.
I bet.
Those critics often point to other big cases with white victims that got way more national attention.
Yeah.
Their argument is that the Wichita Massacre, even though it was brutal and the crime was so random, didn't get the same level of outrage or media coverage.
So they're saying that the media maybe unconsciously downplayed the case?
Yeah.
Because the victims were white and the perpetrators were black.
That's right.
It's a challenging argument to think about.
It is.
But it's important to consider all sides, even if they make us uncomfortable.
I agree.
We can't just ignore perspectives because we don't like them.
Exactly.
And there's another side to this argument, too.
There is.
Some people say the case got plenty of attention, especially locally and regionally.
Right.
They argue that the national media focuses on stories that have broader informations or that will resonate with the wider audience.
Yeah.
And that the Wichita Massacre, while horrific, was ultimately a local story.
That's their perspective.
So we have this tension between the perception of a national media bias and the fact that many crimes, no matter how awful, don't always make it to the national stage.
You've got it.
So are we saying that just because something is awful doesn't mean it will be on national news?
Not necessarily.
Oh, interesting.
Media coverage is a complex thing.
I imagine.
It's influenced by so many factors like editorial decisions, news values, audience demographics.
Okay.
Even unconscious bias can come into play.
Wow, so it's not a simple issue.
Not at all.
It sounds like this debate over the Wichita Massacre case's media coverage is really just a small part of a much bigger conversation.
Right.
About how race, crime, and media all intersect in our society.
It is, and it raises some really tough questions.
Like what?
About whether those implicit biases,
okay,
both in the media and within society, can shape which stories get amplified and which ones get ignored.
That's something to think about for sure.
It's a conversation we need to have, even if it's hard.
Definitely, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
You mentioned other cases that have been used as comparisons in this discussion.
I did.
Can you give us some examples?
Of course.
Okay.
One case that often comes up happened just 8 days before the Wichita Massacre.
8 days?
A 19-year-old black man named Cornelius Oliver murdered 4 young black individuals in Wichita.
Oh, wow. So a very similar crime in terms of the brutality and the number of victims.
Right.
But with a different racial dynamic.
Yes.
Were the details similar to the Carr brothers case?
In some ways, yes.
Okay, like what?
Oliver shot 2 his victims execution style in the back of the head.
Wow.
Just like the Carr brothers.
Really?
He also killed his girlfriend and her roommate.
Oh my goodness.
All 4 victims were young.
Yeah.
And their lives were cut short in a senseless act of violence.
That's heartbreaking. And you're saying this case with black victims and a black perpetrator didn't receive the same level of media attention as the Wichita Massacre.
That's the argument some people make.
I see.
They point to this case as proof that the media is more likely to focus on cases where the victims are white and the perpetrators are black.
I see.
They argue that this difference in coverage reinforces those harmful stereotypes and contributes to a distorted view of crime in America.
It makes you wonder if we're all prone to these unconscious biases.
It does.
Whether we realize it or not.
It's something we all need to be aware of.
For sure.
And it's not just about media coverage. It's about how we talk about crime, how we see different communities, and how we react to violence.
It's about how we talk about everything.
Exactly.
It's bigger than just one story.
These are complex issues, and there are no easy answers.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the outrage or the emotional aspects of a story.
Yeah.
But we need to step back and ask ourselves why certain stories grab us more than others.
We do.
What's going on there? What factors are at play? Are we letting our own biases shape our perceptions?
Those are all good questions to ask ourselves.
These are tough questions, but we need to face them.
Absolutely.
We can't avoid these conversations.
We can't.
We're back, and I want to go back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Something that I think is at the heart of what makes the Wichita Massacre so unsettling.
All right.
The randomness of it all.
Yeah.
This chilling idea that evil can strike anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Right.
Without reason or warning.
Absolutely.
You know, the fact that the Carr brothers just seemed to pick their final victims at random just because they were at home.
Right, place, wrong time.
It's a whole other level of terror to this story.
It does.
You know, it shatters our sense of safety and makes us question, like, the very foundation of order and predictability that we kind of rely on in our daily life.
It makes you feel like it could happen to anyone.
Exactly. It's like this dark underlying current of fear that suddenly surges to the surface. And it makes you realize that even when things seem normal, vulnerability is always there lurking beneath the surface.
It is. It's always there.
I think a lot of people beyond Wichita felt that in the wake of this tragedy.
I think so, too.
It really resonated.
It did. The Wichita Massacre kind of tapped into a collective anxiety, I think. This fear of the unknown and the things we can't control.
Right.
Which is probably in all of us to some degree.
Yeah, definitely.
And when something like this happens, it brings those fears right to the surface.
In a really visceral way.
Very real, yeah.
It's like that saying, wrong place, wrong time. But in this case, it wasn't just like missing a train or being late for work.
Right.
This was life or death.
Exactly.
And the fact that it could have been anyone. That there was no pattern or motive. Just makes it so much more terrifying.
It takes away any sense of control.
So how do we even process that?
It's hard.
How do we make sense of the fact that sometimes bad things happen to good people for absolutely no reason?
It's a question that people have struggled with for ages. I bet, philosophers, theologians.
Right.
But it's also something we all have to face on a personal level when we see tragedies like the Wichita Massacre.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's important to say there are no easy answers.
Right.
No perfect explanations for something like this.
Okay.
There's just this element of the absurd,
Yeah.
the senseless that we can't rationalize.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, but I also think that by wrestling with these questions,
Okay.
by facing the darkness and the pain, we can also find a place for resilience,
Okay.
for hope, for a deeper appreciation for life itself.
That's a beautiful thought.
Thank you.
Finding light in the darkness,
Right?
Seeing that even when faced with unimaginable horror, the human spirit can find ways to endure, to heal, to move forward.
Absolutely, to keep going.
And I think Holly G's story,
Yes.
the sole survivor,
Right.
really shows us that resilience.
She's an inspiration.
Her courage and determination, her refusal to be defined by what happened.
Amazing.
It's inspiring for us all.
It really is. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times,
Yes.
even when you're facing unimaginable loss and trauma, the human spirit can persevere.
And maybe in that perseverance
Yeah.
and that refusal to give in to despair,
Right.
we can find some hope,
Yes.
a little bit of light to guide us through those shadows.
That's beautifully said.
And we're not alone in these struggles.
We're not.
When tragedies like the Wichita Massacre happen,
Yeah.
they affect everyone, the victims' families, entire communities.
The whole nation, in a way.
And in those times of collective grief and questioning,
Uh-huh.
it's so important to support each other,
Yes.
to find comfort in our shared humanity.
We need each other.
You're right. We need to have those tough conversations.
You do.
Acknowledge the pain, the fear, the anger,
Absolutely.
but also find ways to come together to heal, to build a world where these awful things are less likely to happen.
A bigger world.
I agree. And I think the Wichita Massacre,
Yeah.
as hard as it is to think about,
It is.
can actually help us start those conversations.
It can.
It reminds us how important empathy and compassion are,
Yes.
and how much we need to work together to build a more just and humane society.
I couldn't agree more.
This deep dive into the Wichita Massacre has been a journey into the darkest parts of human nature.
It has.
But it's also shown us the strengths of the human spirit,
Right.
the power of resilience,
Right.
and that we always need hope,
We do.
even in the face of tragedy.
Even then.
And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about,
Okay.
something to keep exploring on your own.
All right.
We've talked about how random this crime was,
Uh-huh.
the legal battles,
Right.
the media coverage,
Yeah.
and all those complex questions about race and perception that it raised.
Important questions.
But what about the victims? What were their stories?
Right.
Their dreams, their hopes?
What did they want out of life?
And how can we make sure that their lives,
Yes.
which were cut short so tragically,
It's awful.
are remembered not just as statistics
Right.
or parts of a legal case,
They were people.
but as individuals who lived in love,
Exactly.
who left their mark on the world?
We need to remember that.
That's something I want all of you to think about,
I agree.
to research, to explore,
Yes.
because by remembering the victims,
Uh-huh.
honoring their lives,
It's important.
we can maybe turn this tragedy into something positive,
Okay.
into a reason to make the world a better place where these senseless acts of violence won't be tolerated.
That's a powerful thought.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Wichita Massacre.
It's been a journey.
It's a story that stays with you,
It does.
one that makes us face some uncomfortable truths, deal with some complex emotions,
There's heavy stuff.
and ultimately to find a way to keep going
Yes.
with hope and a commitment to making the world a more just and compassionate place.
We need that.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep telling the stories that need to be told.
I will. Thanks for having me. 2028.